In thinking about the theme of trust for this month, I certainly had to spend a moment on repair, on when trust is broken, and had to think about what are the models for that. Last year in our Unitary Versalist Association Common Read, we worked with On Repentance and Repair by Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg. She offered a Maimonides method for achieving reconciliation, uh, for asking for forgiveness, for our relationship for forgiveness. But for this service, I want to begin with something a little bit more mundane, which is This Old House. So the TV show, in case you don't know, this is a TV show from public broadcasting out of Boston, and started like 4 decades ago, like a long time ago, right? And on this show, a small, kind of modest venture out of Boston, it brought together skilled professionals in woodworking, plumbing, landscaping, general contracting, and much more. They worked with local owners to address problems in, yes, these old houses. And when they were deconstructing a space, one particular space, or perhaps an entire house, they would talk about the challenges, the history, perhaps, of the location, the surprises that came up along the way that led to changes in direction, and trying to manage the cost of everything. Most projects had a history lesson or two in the course of it, whether it was the location, the history of the house itself, or in an episode I saw recently, I think it had nearly every generation of electricity wiring in the one house. Oh, yeah, knob and tube on forward. Oh my gosh, it's really good they took that back to the studs. So we saw, those of us who watched this saw the dismantling and the disruption each week. And then we witnessed the slow reconstruction, the slow improvement, the gradual work that went into the structure. How much work went into the structure? Could be the roof, it could be sealing the bathroom and the shower, it could be in the heating system and the cooling and the electricity. Enormous amounts of labor that would never be visible, but simply were part of the integration of this structure then. And then would create a place where folks could live and grow and hopefully thrive in their lives. There could be, I think there could be, I don't know if people have done this, I haven't looked on YouTube or whatever. I think there could be an entire subgenre within the This Old House decades of how they made foundations happen by itself. If anybody's had to deal with foundation work, you know how much digging is involved, how much measuring, how much care, how challenging, and the engineering that is involved. Just the foundations would be a whole sub-thread for the This Old House community. You had these massive works that then would result in peaceful lawns and walks and beautiful shrubbery without any idea of what was below that earth. And so things came together. As they came together, there was a certain joy, a certain relief, a certain satisfaction of the job well done, and also a certain peace in different measures from the owners. And I will grant, as I watch some of these homes, there is an enormous amount of privilege. Absolutely, to be fair, to be sure. My spouse and I would look at these projects and be like, "Oh, that looks great." Not in my lifetime, but that looks great. We love watching. But what also This Old House did was branch out into improving a lot of different kinds of properties, preservation of beautiful historic structures that really meant something as well. It wasn't simply for aesthetics or simply for someone's pleasure. There was meaning in the work too. They went across the country, so had moments, I think, such as working in, say, Detroit or Louisiana, where they brought out the highlighting the racial and the class challenges of the communities in which they were working and which they were partnering with people in order to create beautiful refreshing of the community and development in places that had been impoverished and ignored by capitalism and empire, frankly. And these people who started with this, the men, if you will, who started with this show have grown, many have retired, and a newer, more diverse generation of hosts is now taking up the reins as well. There is a dedicated channel on Pluto for This Old House. You could have it just 24-hour This Old House. I admit that's where I've been going for a little comfort watching. I listen to it when I want the comforting sound. Oh, Boston. Oh, the sound is real. But also when I want to see people who care about creating good things in the world and not a lot of drama. The construction offers plenty. The workers in this old house, they completed small, repetitive tasks, knowing that it would add up to quality and stability. There was a brush stroke and a nail and a careful measure before cutting the plywood. There was precision when digging out a foundation. These small moments kept adding up again and again. I'm thinking about when trust is broken. I'm going to make an educated guess, and that probably each of us knows how that feels. I know for me, it can feel like this deep body blow, this deep jolt to the heart, and then flush everywhere. So perhaps when it can feel like a hit to the self, there's something to having an embodied model of repair like this old house. Writer Marilyn Robinson says, "It is trust that knits up the world, a stuff particularly liable to fraying and raveling. It is trust that knits up the world, a stuff particularly liable to fraying and raveling." You could ask the question, have you had your heart broken? But that would be rhetorical because the experience of breaking trust, of being heartbroken, is part of our human experience. There are so many ways in which we harm others, in which others hurt us. It can be based in relationships, it can be based in trust of every level, be with parents, be with neighbors, friends, members of our family, people who might say one thing, profess one thing, and then act completely opposite of it. It could be very much trust broken in our institutions, especially religious bodies that preach love and then condemn people to eternal damnation, or preach love and then say, no, you are not welcome. You are not recognized. You are not holy. You are not a child of God because you haven't met certain standards. But we're going to still talk about love. It could be within our government, as we are experiencing now. It could be in our government well before January 20th. It could be small things that break us, that harm us, that are among us that we do to others. It could be tiny things, something ignored, a call not returned, a greeting not exchanged. It could be massive, life altering losses of an illness, of a death, of an accident. It Could be the trauma that never leaves, a deep loss that is permanent and simply gets life enfolded around it but never goes away. I know the breaking of trust and the loss of being able to count on something is not a one time experience, but has the gall to happen again and again. I want to offer it is entirely fine if, in course of talking about the breaking of trust and contemplating what rebuilding might be like, but especially about the breaking, if there's moments rising up for you that distract you from being present, I get that that's inevitable at times. This is a place where things will rise, where things can rise, including what is hurt. And sometimes this can be the only place where that vulnerability feels like it's allowed. So I invite you that it's okay and come back to the sermon when you're ready. I really hope, if nothing else, I really hope that I do not, when somebody has expressed that something has pained them, something has hurt them, and especially if I have done it, that I don't tell people to just get over it because this pain is subjective and it's not something that one can measure or simply say, this is the timeline and otherwise you should be done. You know how hard it is to repair when something has been broken. My colleague, the Reverend Dennis McCarty has a piece. I offer an excerpt on his piece, Thoughts on Second Chances. He talks of the trust torn between Adam and Eve and God in the book of Genesis when they go against God's one boundary and eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. So after they eat from this tree, this fruit, Adam and Eve are expelled from the garden by God and given the burden of mortality and the pains that come with being human. My colleague says, Adam and Eve teach us something important, that deep love and trust can expose a doorway to intractable sin. In a deep relationship, there can come a time when you learn something about the one you love, something you never wanted to learn, and that you can never unlearn. That where love runs deep and trust runs deep, hurt can also run ever so deep. And so God loved Adam and Eve, but they sinned against God. Or wait a minute, didn't they love God? And didn't God sin against them? And it was both. And if we could just die then and there in that miserable moment of undesired revelation, that would be ever so much easier than going on. Just crawl up and die. Alas, life was not designed to let us off without our share of heartbreak. There are no second chances. That is, not until someone creates one. Together, both of us, ex nihilo. And if you think it was something, God forming Adam and Eve out of clots of blood or bits of mud or dust of the earth, or whatever wasn't there until the divine willed it into being, that was an easy miracle compared with our humanity and what that demands. Remake love out of what we just learned about each other, tame two hearts gone feral with hurt and fear, find our key to a door that's become stone, unseal a wall when a wall is all that remains of our wounded love. Mythology is so much easier than surgery. Mythology is so much easier than surgery, than a sincere apology that might make a difference, than wishing to take back an action, than reconciling with the enormity of failure in our systems or more uncomfortably in us. That revelation that we cannot unlearn or take back. We might have to admit that we hurt someone, that we strayed or ignored or simply didn't care in that moment, that we weren't as good or moral or mature as we think we are. And we keep learning that lesson again and again, no matter how much we commit to doing better. Repeat and repeat in different ways or the same way. But at some point, there will be a desire for care again, a desire to try again, a desire to try and rebuild. I was looking at Frances Fry's How to Build and Rebuild Trust. And she talks, it seems compact. If you're going to rebuild it, then be authentic, have real rigor in the thought and logic of it, have real empathy towards the person. Seems like a nice recipe, right? Blueprints for construction and reconstruction. It is deceptively challenging. But I do think one of the pieces that's at the beginning of rebuilding of trust is to recognize the value and the place of empathy. Because in this conversation, in this looking up and talking about rebuilding of trust and talking about Danya Ruttenberg's work and the path of Maimonides, where it takes real ownership is the first step in reconciliation, in repentance, in the conversations, both political and social, in this moment about who's being attacked, who has laws being based against them, and so on. It seems that empathy is so much at the heart of any reconstruction of trust. Empathy of seeing a person, a being, as truly, actually human, as seeing ourselves as worthy, as really committing to recognizing each human being as a being, no matter who they are, no matter where they're stationed, no matter what their mental or health condition, and more. We have this lack of trust in institutions because we've had this repeated experience of being treated as nothing, as a number, or not even a thing to pay attention to. I think the basis of reconstruction is this empathy. I saw this again. I've been in a few conversations about race and violence and poverty in Peoria in this past year. Some of those conversations have been really painfully honest and really hard to hear. Simply saying, as someone like myself, a white, uh, middle class person showing up, and simply saying, I'm here and I want to listen and I'm committing to be here, can end up being, as a person, receiving a measure of the rage and the frustration that is known by so many of the people in this community. And it is brutal. It is deeply uncomfortable. It is painful and traumatic in itself. And hearing those deep stories is something that is given and not lightly. Because the person sharing that story has also had enough experience with the fact that white folks can get up and leave. White folks get a choice about when to engage, by and large. No wonder someone like me is not just embraced, right? Oh, you want to help? Come on over. I don't have to stay there. I don't have to live there. I don't have to suffer and observe the suffering of the people and the neighbors and the children because of what is endured every day, because there is such a lack of empathy. There is such deep bias. There is so few resources. the struggle with race and poverty comes again and again. People might make an effort, and then it fizzles because of differences and disagreements and because it is such a systemic and large problem. And then the people directly involved, directly impacted, who have to go back to their communities and continue to live in the struggle, don't wanna risk being part of the next effort because, nothing's gonna happen. And then that breaks the trust even further and makes the divisions even deeper. It makes it even more difficult because it feels like trying is just gonna make it worse. But I did see another opportunity recently. There was a conversation on Thursday over at Reachway Church on unpacking homelessness in Peoria. And it included people from this area as well as organizers and direct service providers from Chicago. It was a panel of conversation. Some of those questions were really difficult to ask, and some of them were really difficult to hear. And a lot of the answers were the same conversation again and again. We have no resources. How do you expect people to get to a place on time when they don't have a watch or a clock, when they don't have a way to keep themselves clean and safe and whole, even when they've tried? One of the takeaways from that conversation was how much it meant when people showed up and demonstrated genuine care and stayed there and stayed caring and kept going back again and again. How much consistent care really made a difference in showing, in demonstrating that these people really saw the people in need as fully human. How much it meant and means for people to believe in one another, for somebody to believe in people who are so deep in the struggle of addiction, of mental illness, of not being able to get the care they need, to simply be loved, that showing up was love in very practical terms and showing up every time, not treating people as optional. So maybe some of these challenges are so deep and so hard. Maybe we're not always going to get to those every day, but this conversation about homelessness, I think it could help. I think it could be really powerfully transformative. I want to encourage us to find those places where we could make a difference, when we could show up consistently. One of the pieces of that method of how to rebuild trust was very much about empathy and authenticity. And it must be grounded, very well grounded, both in humility, in recognizing how much each one of us has contributed to the concerns, has not taken our own measure and reflected before we went out and tried to be helpful to someone. And recognizing that repair, brokenness is not on a particular timeline either. Yeah, the money that Lula received from the city just ran out at the end of February last week. But but the problem goes far past any particular calendar date. Moving at the speed of trust, as we say, is not a quick fix. It comes at its own speed. It's not linear. It is its own time and path. My mental image for this service was that of a torn heart, something stretched and distorted from tearing. And unlike so many images of mended hearts that you could go online and check that out, those with stitches that go all the way up and mend the heart, as if the work was complete, as if it was done. So the image of my mind is one of just beginning, of the torn heart that is a little bit distorted, is just the stitch at the bottom of it. So I wonder, can we Where can we find the way to mend and add that first stitch? Start with that bit, that first increment of repair, and keep it intact. I'd say that empathy would be an enormous way to begin. Adding that first bit of glue and gold, as in the Japanese practice of kintsugi, of mending and applying a little bit of fixative and a little bit of the shine, not to hide, but to acknowledge that this is simply a start. So, a heart torn with a dab of gold and glue at the base of the tear, could that be the place to begin? Grounded well in empathy. I recognize that fixing a home, fixing many things can seem easy, whether it's stage construction, whether it's this old house. But as my colleague Dennis McCarty says, fixing relationship seems easier in mythology than in reality sometimes. In humans, we can't do anything but try and come from love and marvel, as we heard in Jan Richardson's readings. Just take heart from the fact that the heart keeps beating. Because then perhaps that beginning can remind us that we are worth the effort, that we are worth trying again when we mess up, when we are hurt by others. As Marilyn Robinson said, it is trust that knits up the world, stuff particularly liable to fraying and raveling. So let us go forth, trusting in the beating of our hearts, grounded in the empathy that is one of our great strengths and can let us begin again and again in a wounded and torn world. So may it be.